Hey everyone! Today I wanted to do a video talking about how I learned how to speak Portuguese. For those of you learning foreign languages, whether it's Portuguese or some other language, I'm sure that my story and some of the things that I did can help you as well. If you didn't catch my video where I talk about how I moved to Portugal in the first place, you can go watch that and get some context as to why I was learning Portuguese in the first place. When it became clear that I was going to be moving to Portugal, I realized that I knew absolutely nothing about Portuguese. I had never studied it, I had never really heard very much of it, and I didn't really know much about it or its grammar. The closest reference that I had was Spanish, which I could understand but could not speak, and even that is still very different from Portuguese itself. From when I was a kid, I studied French and had become proficient in that, and when I was in college, I became proficient in Russian. I had also studied a bunch of other languages separately on my own, so I've always had something of an aptitude for learning languages and technical aspects of doing that, like grammar, vocabulary, and other things. When it came time to decipher Portuguese a little bit, that helped me out a lot, because the first thing that I sat down to do was learn everything I could about Portuguese, about the differences that I would need to know between European and Brazilian Portuguese when I was starting to learn the language, the things that I should look out for, and so on. It took about a month before I landed in Lisbon to learn everything I possibly could before getting there, so I had a basic understanding of how Portuguese works. In truth, however, Portuguese is very different from even Spanish, and especially French and Russian. Because I was moving to Lisbon, I made a specific point of seeking out European Portuguese resources, which on the internet are harder to come by than Brazilian Portuguese. So I had to eschew a bunch of popular fundamentals, things like apps, audio resources, videos, because of the lack of them online at the time. My study abroad program did not include a Portuguese class alongside it because my classes were to be in English, so I was left to my own devices to look for classes and ways to learn the language and integrate myself locally. There was the option at my host university to take a Portuguese language class for Erasmus students, but I didn't last very long there because I found it to be slow and impractical. It was a much better use of my time to get out of my house, pay attention to the way that people talk around me in public, as well as doing things like reading books. And because I had a little bit of extra money in my budget, I was able to buy a bunch of books in Portuguese. If you don't have the cash to buy extra books, you can always go to a library where you have a wealth of books at your disposal. I always found Portuguese people to be quite friendly with me and quite impressed that an American was trying to learn their variety of the language and not Brazilian Portuguese. So I would often get help from Portuguese people as well. I did take some former classes when I went back to Portugal after finishing my degree, and I did that at the Faculdade de Letras da Universidade de Lisboa, or FLUL. FLUL has what are considered some of the best Portuguese as a foreign language classes in Lisbon, which I discovered as I was doing my research trying to find Portuguese classes as a way to go back to Portugal. The first time I went back to study Portuguese there, I was already doing the B2 level, and then when I went back another time, I was doing a combined C1 and C2 level. Each semester that I did at FLUL consisted of classes that were 4 hours a day, 4 days a week, for a total of about 160 hours of instruction. Because these classes are very intensive and very thorough, they're not the cheapest Portuguese classes that you can take in Lisbon, but they are worth the cost. I found the classes at FLUL to be very helpful for refining the points of Portuguese grammar that I couldn't quite grasp on my own, and getting some of my patterns of speech straightened out from the way that I was studying on my own. Because the levels that I did were more advanced, I felt that I had gotten more out of my time at FLUL than I would have if I had done more basic levels. But I would never have been able to learn Portuguese if it weren't for taking it upon myself to make use of the immersive environment that I found myself in. So I made sure to take it upon myself to consume as much things in Portuguese and as many local things as I possibly could. Yes, that includes books, but that also means things like television, watching movies, and so on. I also took it upon myself to make friends while I was there, and I also made it a point to make some friends that were functionally monolingual, or in other words, people that couldn't speak English, and make it easier for me. I find that when you meet somebody and start speaking in one language with them, it's hard to switch over to another language as the language that you use with that person. So it's better to get used to talking in the language that you want to talk with that person in, rather than using some other language that's a little bit easier at the time. Making monolingual friends is one of the best ways that you can train your language skills, so long as that person is friendly and patient with you, because that gives you room to make errors, and that gives you room to have your language skills corrected. For me, it was a golden opportunity to get rid of my fear of making mistakes in the language and simply express myself and communicate in whatever way I possibly could. I've always had my ups and downs in Portuguese, and even to this day, I have some days where things just don't quite work right. But that's never deterred me from moving on and learning more. I will often write personal notes to myself in Portuguese and find ways to express things that I've been thinking about in Portuguese, and think about the way that I would phrase something in Portuguese when I'm writing it out in English. For me, Portuguese was the first time I really had to do something on my own and take it upon myself in order to communicate and be understood. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was always drawn to it. However, on a personal level, I also find the Portuguese language to be very poetic and have a really interesting and pleasing rhythm to it. People often talk about languages being romantic or sounding sexy or what have you, and I wouldn't say that I personally think of languages that way, but the way that Portuguese sounds is very pleasing to me. Learning Portuguese also opened up cultural frontiers for me in ways that I had not experienced before. Before moving to Portugal and learning Portuguese, I knew very little about Portugal, Brazil, or any of the other former Portuguese colonies. Through learning Portuguese, I was able to go further in my cultural understanding not just of Portugal, but of Brazil and the friends that I made from there as well. I think this is a common experience when people immigrate to another country and learn the local language and begin to live their lives in it. Because when you learn a language in this way, what you're doing is really living your life in that language. For me, I chose Portuguese. That's all I have for this video. I hope it was interesting for you. I hope you maybe learned something. If you did, give it a thumbs up, and you might think about subscribing to my channel if you're not already. On my channel, I make videos about food, culture, and the Portuguese language, so you can find all of those on my channel or in playlists in the eye above, and I will see you next time.